Hi, everybody. Today I will be discussing the topic of stress in farm animals, giving examples from cattle. So, animal welfare is a state of well being of animals and in which at least basic needs are met and suffering is minimized. Animal rights, on the other hand, is a belief system that animals intrinsically have the same rights to life and liberty as afforded to humans. When we talk about animal welfare, it is basically people's moral responsibility to ensure that the welfare of animals is cared for and that they do not suffer unnecessary discomfort, stress, or injury. So, experienced, efficient, quiet handling of livestock, as we know, it has low stress stock handling using recommended techniques and facilities, as well as taking measures to eliminate pain and accidental injury, will reduce stress in animals and prevent quality deficiencies in meat and byproducts. So, improving animal welfare has many advantages, and here I give a summary of a couple of those. In particular, with livestock destined for slaughter, these will have benefits of improvement in productivity, animal welfare, and personal safety. So, increased production through humane treatment of slaughter animals can be achieved through various mechanisms. For example, reducing carcass damage and waste, and adding higher value due to lowered bruising and injury, reducing mortality, improving the quality of meat. As we know, governments, NGOs, and consumers are ever more concerned about animal welfare, and better conditions of livestock operations will improve the safety of workers in the industry. And this is a mind map or a cloud map showing the various aspects of the dimensions of animal welfare and animal ethics. When we talk about animal welfare in production animals, it is a whole supply chain monitoring of animal well-being, which is vital for future. So animal welfare starts on the farm, but it does not finish on the farm. As you can see, shown in the red stars, you may have farms that are the breeding property, finishing of livestock, or even wild harvesting of goats, for example. But then animals will travel to various destinations such as sale yard, feedlot, or the live export market. And eventually the food will end up on somebody's dinner table. And so animal welfare starts from the farm and it is a whole supply chain point of view. When we talk about animal production, animal growth, animal welfare is of paramount importance. So when we look at the perfect cow, we basically want to make sure that she has signs of heat and is able to conceive when bred. Is able to produce a live young without much assistance, resists metastasis and avoids injury, and is able to walk comfortably and rarely needs trimming. Is able to produce a very high yield milk with correct composition, inexpensive ration, and low maintenance costs, as well as few metabolic disorders, and is able to maintain a healthy body condition. So good genetics is equals to optimal production and health, as well as optimal production of farm animals. The important factors that control the whole animal growth are the animal's genetics, background, its nutritional intake, and the environment in which it is exposed. So when we look at the various stressors facing animals, it can be physical or psychological. And we all are aware of the five freedoms of animals: freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain and injury, and disease, freedom to express normal behaviors, and freedom from fear and distress. As we did further research on the topic of animal welfare, there has been incorporation of the mental state, which looks at the higher brain function of animals. And as you can see, the physical domains of animal welfare actually stems into the mental state, which helps us to make an assessment of animal welfare, which can be good, neutral, or bad. Now, stress itself can be physical, environmental, metabolic, or psychological, as you can see over here in some of these images. All of these stresses will generate a similar physiological response, and in most cases, there will be a reduction in food intake, and others may have direct tissue effects. So in the next few slides, I will go through some examples of welfare concerns in the domestic um, production animals using cattle as examples. And one of them I have shown over here is weaning in domestic cattle. So weaning process begins when the energy invested by the mother in the care of her offspring is greater than the benefit that this investment would bring for the young, and the investment may actually put at risk the future reproductive success of the mother. So from this point, there's a gradual reduction in the milk production and maternal care, which allows more energy to be invested into the reproductive cycle. So early weaning is usually around 70 to 90 days of lactation, and it is recommended to increase the reproductive rates in extensive pasture systems. Now, milk weaning or separation, as we know, milk is a food rich in protein and energy. And in the case of beef cattle, it has been estimated that the amount of milk produced by cows 6 to 7 months after birth can provide approximately 30% of the metabolizable energy for European breeds of calf raised on pasture. Now, weaning distress appears to be greater in calf that suckle cows with high milk yield and are heavier at weaning. Pasture-based systems, it is quite common to isolate calves during weaning for about a day in the corral and then move them to a new paddock. In most cases, the corral or new paddock may have environments totally unknown to the calf, and thus they do not know the location of resources such as food, shade, or water sources. So changing the physical environment can interfere with the animal's ability to recognize members of their group, which can also generate social stress. As we can see over here, the early growth and development of a young animal, a calf in this case, it can go through a reduction in immunity, negative emotional judgments, high cortisol levels to do with stress, rumination, the visible white eye is quite apparent, sleep disturbances, increased heart rate and heart rate variability, and you can actually look at the social anxiety, the social skills of animals, and sociability, as well as lowered weight gain and growth. So when we are caring for the newborn beef calves separated from their moms, we should be looking into the colostrum intake, navel care, protection, nursing cows, as well as milk replacer diets. In the absence of a nurse cow, we can use milk replacers that contain at least 22% of crude protein and 15% fat. As the calf grows, keep the amount of milk replacer constant, but also offer calf starter feeds and good quality hay as its appetite increases. Make clean water available for the calf as well. One of the other issues seen in cattle quite often is bloating, which basically is acidosis and more scientifically termed as ketosis, which is a metabolic disorder that occurs in cattle when energy demands, such as high milk production, exceeds the energy intake and results in a negative energy balance. So, ketotic cattle often have low blood glucose, which is the blood sugar concentrations, and especially in extensive production systems with high protein diets. Let's move on and look at some of the other stressors facing the cattle industry. Heat stress is common and a growing concern in dairy cattle as well as beef cattle. As you can see in these figures, it's clearly demonstrated that summer months with high temperature humidity index, shown in red and yellow, actually results in a reduction in milk fat. Your milk fat to protein ratio decreases, and the somatic cell count also significantly increases. The temperature humidity index is a common indicator of in heat stress risk in livestock. So solar radiation could increase the actual heat stress in grazing cattle, and new generation of sensors that continuously monitor the THI within the barn close to the animals. Producers can actually monitor and anticipate heat stress risks. Negative impact of heat stress is linked to the temperature humidity index level and to the duration of exposure, both in terms of the number of hours per day and the number of consecutive days of stress. So here are some examples. In dairy cows, heat stress threshold as low as 68 can mean that, for example, at 50% humidity, the cattle can begin to experience negative effects of heat stress at a temperature of 22 degrees Celsius. In beef cattle, heat stress threshold is estimated at 72, which basically means at 50% humidity, cattle are exposed to heat stress at an ambient temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. Pre-wean calves have a heat stress threshold at around 78. Now, in sheep, we can see the thermal neutral zone is between 12 to 32 degrees Celsius, and for goats, it's between 12 to 24 degrees Celsius. And we need to be aware of the thermal demands of each of our animals based on the conditions on the farm and the local climate. When we look at the signs of moderate heat stress, animals will show very shallow breathing, increased respiration rate, profuse sweating, reduction in feed intake, reduction in the line time. So basically what happens is there is an increase in heat dissipation. The animal will spend less time lying quietly and ruminating. So research has shown a significant drop in the laying time of animals as the heat stress threshold actually reduces. And there is a reduction in the rumination activity and a correlation between rumination time and rumen function, and hence a lowered production performance. And it has been shown for dairy cow that for each 10-point increase in the thermal humidity index, daily rumination could be reduced by an hour and daily production of around 2.5 kilograms per day of production gain. So under heat stress condition, rumination is pretty much suboptimal, and you'll have erratic feeding behavior. As digestion itself produces heat, the animal will tend to eat less in the coolest hours of the day, impacting production. One of the other significant stressors facing cattle is the issue of lameness. As you can see here, there are scores set in place to look at the severity of lameness from 0, which is normal, to mildly lame, moderately lame, and severely lame animals. Let's look a bit into the mental state of animals using cattle as an example. So the mental state basically includes the limbic system, which is a complex system of nerves and networks in the brain that involve several areas at the edge of the cortex, which is concerned with instinct and mood. So this part of the brain basically controls the animal's basic emotions, fear, pleasure, and anger, and as well as the ability to care for the offspring. As you can see over here, these stresses will generate an increase in the HPA axis response and eventually result in the production of cortisol, which will have consequences on the immune function, growth and development, and reproduction. So you will have things like a decrease in glucose uptake, stimulation of gluconeogenesis, and the facilitation of glycogenolysis, increased lipolysis, as well as the suppression of inflammation. Now, most of the behaviors, as we see in animals, we can actually distinguish between stressed and unstressed animals by looking at their physique. And Temple Grandin has done some very, very interesting work to actually measure emotions in animals by looking at the ears, eyes, noses, and you can look at stroking cattle, which actually reduces the fear and increases calmness, as well as the visible white of the eyes also decrease in relaxed cattle. And these are some of the key endocrine structures in the cattle's body that is of interest to us from a metabolism and stress and reproduction point of view. Let's look at stress and pain in feedlots and sale yards. So animals actually feel pain and the emotion of fear, and they have brain structures, as we have just seen in the previous slide, that enable them to feel fear and the suffering of pain, which is basically they suffer pain in the same way as humans. So the fear and pain are very strongly correlated with stress in livestock, and actually it leads to a reduction in the quality of meat. So pain is usually the effect of injury and suffering, and it affects the quality and the value of meat from the affected animals. And you can see here there can be a actual gross morphological effect as well as subclinical effect, which is known as bruising in the carcass of the animals itself. And you could also have a damaged hide, and particularly due to the injuries in the sale yards or the feedlots in themselves. So this is just a schematic diagram showing an acute stress response. So in the transportation of cattle, in this case, there will be a stress response, but we need to ensure that the stress response does not overpower the fitness of the animals, and eventually there is 100% adaptation and recovery to baseline state. If not, basically what happens is the stress will lead to a reduction of the glycogen bucket. So basically what you see over here is that there is a glycogen bucket, which is the energy reserve of the animals. So you can see in the bucket itself on the left, there are various stressors such as transportation, stress itself, and handling stress, which will reduce the energy reserve of the animals pre-slaughter, and eventually it will increase the ultimate pH of the meat that is known as dark cutting in the industry. And our own research has actually shown there's a positive correlation between the ultimate pH as well as fecal cortisol metabolites in cattle just prior to slaughter. So how can we measure stress? We can measure stress using behavioral, physiological, performance-based endocrine and immune parameters. We can look at things like vocalization, movement, and flight and fight responses, freezing behavior. These are more acute stress situations. In terms of physiological measures, we can look at heart rate, blood pressure, skin temperature, respiration rate. We can look at the performance in terms of the volume of milk being produced, and there are various endocrine parameters that can be used as well. But we need to be able to distinguish between the acute stress markers and the chronic stress markers. As you can see over here, chronic stress markers, some of the performance indicators like reduction in growth, body condition score, fertility, longevity, and increased metabolic and infectious diseases as well. So this is just a structure of glucocorticoid, and you can see it can be measured in both blood samples as well as feces and hair. So an example of chronic stress here, you can see we can actually measure the chronic stress in the tail hair of cattle. So here in this case, the alarm phase is being generated, but because of the overcrowding of cattle in this sheltered condition, which was done in India in a study, you can see there's a reduction in the fitness of the cattle. So the effects of stress on cattle, in summary, it can be a combination of a reduction in feed intake, lower energy levels, weight loss, reduced consumption rate, reduced production of milk, small or premature calves, weakened immune system, and diseases. So key indicators of cattle behavior in feedlot and at sale point. We can look at the tactile interactions with the handlers. We can look at the selection of cattle for feedlot, which should be made with the careful assessment of health, and things like cattle with poor body condition, lameness, and other issues may be better sold straight to the slaughterhouse. Improving cattle welfare at the abattoir, we can see some of the health indicators of the cattle, things like body condition, abnormality of the tail, tegumentary lesions, lameness, other problems, handler indicators, and various physical kicks, pokes, blows, and hits. And a very interesting review was done on this topic by researchers published in Frontiers in Veterinary Science. As well, we can look at the gut health post-slaughter and come up with some quantitative indicators of the actual health and well-being of the animals that are being destined for slaughter. So finally, it is a paddock to the plate context, and the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework has very beautifully highlighted the 6 pillars of sustainability, and animal welfare plays a very critical part together with the economics, environment, and the community. And as I said earlier, farm animal welfare starts on the farm, but it does not end on the farm. It is a continuous process, and we need to have very objective measures of stress and be able to assess stress and manage stress. So, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me through my email. Thank you.